Hello, everyone. This month's meetup was another great discussion and conversation about the connections of language and peace building. Today, I want to summarize a little bit of our discussion that we had. So, our topic was learning language in community, and we had a few questions to shape our discussion. When have you felt a sense of community in your life? We talked about what does community mean to us? What does it include? A lot of people shared stories from childhood or from university days. There are moments that we remember where we really felt a sense of community and felt that connection with other people. We talked about when we learned language together with others and the experience of community and language learning for good or bad. We talked about how a sense of community can help us learn a language together. And we talked a little bit about how language learning and community can help us work for peace and learn language in order to build peace. In our discussion of community, Paul Bourne's definition of building community came up. He says that there are kind of 4 elements that are key to building community. He talks about having fun together, sharing our stories with each other, helping each other, and working together for something greater than ourselves, for a bigger good. And this resonated with our stories of community that we had experienced. Each of those stories had some kind of element of fun, of sharing with each other, of providing help, asking for help and getting that, and also having projects and plans and things that we were working on together for something larger than just our community. So we talked about the connections of language learning and community, and one idea that came up was the role of feedback. Of course, you can get feedback from teachers or from AI apps as well, but a learning community gives practical, real-life feedback from humans about how effective our communication is. It's one thing for our phones to tell us that our pronunciation is clear. It's another for someone to actually understand what we're trying to say in that language. So people can give us good feedback right away based on whether they understand us or not, based on whether we've actually connected. Learning language in community, we've said, was also really helpful for choosing language learning objectives. So in community, we have the opportunity to negotiate our specific language learning goals. Maybe in a class, a teacher gives us an assignment, but it's still up to our group to figure out how to implement that and what we want to focus on with that. And so we get to learn more of what we want to learn and to make choices of how we can learn together. So there is some level of choice and agency and freedom in that respect in learning language and community. Encouragement was another theme that came up. In community, encouragement is a kind of natural part of the environment. So when we are learning, if we have a good sense of community where we feel safe and supported, then that encouragement can really motivate us for language learning. And we talked about the role of teachers in this, that teachers can organize small groups in the classroom and pay attention to how group dynamics are based on what needs are perceived there. But the goal being to promote an encouraging and supportive environment for language learning. We had a lot of stories about how intentional group work can lead to community and build a sense of community in support of language learning. And then we talked about the flip side of it. In so many places these days, community is changing, and not everyone has the opportunity to experience a real sense of community in person or even online. And language classrooms, language learning environments could be a place where people feel this sense of community. It could be a special experience for them. There's a shared feeling of vulnerability and the effort of trying together. All 4 elements of Paul Bourne's building community would be part of a language learning classroom. So it has the potential to help people get closer with each other. We talked a lot about how community happens online, and we realized that it probably depends on a number of factors, including how many people are participating, who is facilitating, what kind of facilitation approaches they use, and who shows up, just the identity of the people in the group. But we realized that probably connection can happen online. We were connecting in the moment as we were discussing it. And we realize that people enjoy connection in any form, even if it's not as rich as in person. It can be a really meaningful experience. And we had the example of online gaming, where people team up with anonymous participants to fight the enemy in the game. And they're enjoying that sense of connection, even in that online capacity. So enjoyment and motivation was another theme. When creating something together, like a project or a larger task, it can really help learners to learn to enjoy language learning, especially in a context where some of us were teaching in universities or high schools, where students were somewhat forced to take the language classes. They weren't doing this from a sense of intrinsic motivation. Having some kind of community can give them motivation and also help them learn how to enjoy language, instead of it being a topic or a subject to study, that it becomes a way to connect with people. So the human ties can keep this motivation going then, even when people are in a slump and having a hard time with the language learning. We recognize, though, that not just any kinds of language learning tasks build community. It doesn't happen automatically. There has to be themes and topics that are relevant to the community, that people are actually interested in. The groups need to feel a need for the language use. Even if they speak the same language as their first languages, they need to feel a reason why they should practice in the second language. And so authentic task-based learning is really critical, that it's not just a manipulation of people and topics, but that there should be actually some gap, some genuine question that can be filled by the interaction. So then learning the language becomes the way of inquiring and exploring together. One thing we acknowledge that has a special place in building community in a language learning context is using drama, theater, or other works of art. When people are working together to create something artistic, it accesses a different part of us, and we are able to enjoy the experience of working together, and we are creating something bigger than ourselves. So examples of role plays and skits, of visual arts that people created in a language learning environment were all ones that connected to the four elements of Bourne's building community model. And we acknowledge that under the right conditions, language learning can actually lead to community building. So even if people don't start out with the idea of becoming a community, the things we talk about in a language learning setting are questions that we use to get to know each other. But often those questions are too simple. We would never ask them in our first languages. Things like, what's your favorite color? What do you like to do on the weekend? In another kind of class or another kind of setting, those kinds of questions would be skipped over. But those small little things really help to build a sense of trust and connection among people. And so these kinds of communicative activities can really make the whole class feel closer and create an opportunity for building community among them. The final question we discussed was about learning language in community and the connection to peace and peace building. So one thing we talked about is that learning peace through another language is often easier than through our first languages. One English teacher talked about how using difficult topics as a subject in the English class was less controversial than in other settings. They could go into more depth of question and have a wider range of issues and views in their discussion in the English class because they were practicing English. So learning a language creates some space for discussion of topics that may be taboo or uncomfortable in first languages. Language learners need to know what's going on in the world. Part of our reason for learning language is to connect with people in different contexts. So learning about peace in those situations can be a great opportunity. And through language learning, we can frame the issues gently so that it doesn't provoke defensiveness or a sense of attack or polarization, but we can investigate things a little bit more slowly, a little more carefully than we might do that in our first languages. In the language learning community, we also noted that there is a sense of freedom. Some people experience a sense of liberation and they disclose more of themselves when speaking in another language. Somehow they feel a sense of peace and freedom from anxiety. There's a sense of being free from the expectations or self-regulation or a particular image of yourself that you feel like you have to maintain in your first language. And so that freedom can create a sense of peace and also create an opportunity for experimentation with peace building. We acknowledge that singing together about peace can be powerful. There are a lot of great songs on peace-related issues that are also good for language learning. One person shared a story of how their students remembered the songs that they sang more than anything else they did in class. Somehow songs have a special kind of power to touch the heart and touch the mind. Singing together can be kind of a collective action, and songs can be very powerful in shaping our thoughts and feelings as well. And finally, learning about conflict in a language learning community can be a very enriching experience. Of course, conflict is a natural thing and it happens especially in groups. But in a language learning community, when we have a sense of security or safety with each other, we can interact with conflict differently than we usually do. And maybe we can even learn how to do conflict better than we do in our first languages. Dealing with conflict in another language means that we have to slow down. We have to listen a little more carefully. We have to speak a little more carefully, a little more clearly, be a little more precise. And we have to focus on the emotional aspects, like how we are feeling, how others are feeling. We have to check with each other. Are we understanding really? And often we need to get help from other people. So there are natural roles for mediators. And so it can be a rich space to learn about conflict as well. So our conversation today was really rich with learning about how community and language learning connect with peace. It was a wonderful conversation, and thank you to everyone who participated. Next month will be our final meetup for the year, looking at another topic of language and peace building and the connections between them. We hope that you will join us.